Hello YouTube, this is going to be a video about fixes, upgrades and modifications of the CADA Master Series Mercedes-AMG 1 by Bruno JJ1. There are some important fixes and bugs that we're going to be talking about, so let's get to it. The first one is probably the only one that you will potentially break apart from this if you don't pay attention and if you do it wrong. And when I say do it wrong, I mean do it exactly like in the instructions. So it's about rubber bands. In fact, this white rubber band and the one on the other side. In the instructions, these are fitted at step F15. And if I can get the glare away from the screen, we can see that you have to hang the elastic bands on those ball pins. It's just right there. And then, according to the instructions, with the spoiler extended, you must stretch those elastic bands out down to the bush pins at the bottom. So, if we look what's going on here, the rubber band is at probably about 45 degrees away from the angle of the actuator. And it's just one of those regular 3L Technic rubber bands that's usually used in a gearbox stepper. Here it's extended out to somewhere around 7 studs long. That's a lot of stretching. And I can tell you that if you do it like the instructions tell you and you stretch it, then what's going to happen, or what could happen anyway, is this. You're going to break the actuator. And I don't think this is the fault of the part. I think this is the fault of the instructions, because if you screw the actuator all the way down, there is much more overlap of the inside and outside parts, and when you bend it, it doesn't want to bend. It's much stronger. Also, when you retract the actuator, you'll be putting the spoiler down, and that distance, which is around about 7 studs right now, becomes more like 4 studs, something like that. So that's what you have to do. You have to retract the spoiler before you fit the rubber bands. Now, if you're going to tell me, hey, that looks pretty uncomfortable, it's still stretching the actuator, well, the next thing that you're going to add is this piece. It's just a little cowling, little fairing, and it clips on, and it changes, if you could see, the direction of the rubber band to almost the same direction, almost the same angle as the actuator. And that seems to be enough that the actuators are happy. I'm sure they'd be happier if they weren't being pulled on. But they seem to be happy. They're not going to break just from sitting there like that. Thank you for your attention. A question I was asked on the preview video is, will these gears skip? And I said with confidence, no, they're fine. I was wrong. To explain why I was wrong and what you can do about it, I'm going to attempt to explain how the drive system of this model works. So we have 2 electric motors and a pullback motor. All of these are channeled through a differential, which is geared from this differential body directly through to the drive differential. And how does this work and what does it do? This electric motor is connected only to this differential. This electric motor is connected by these bevel gears to the pullback motor. Differentials have the property that the output speed is the average of the input speeds when it's used this way around. So if we run just this motor in forwards travel direction, it will give half the speed of this motor to this differential. If we also run this motor forwards direction, then the average of 1 and 1 will be 1, so we'll get full speed to the differential. And the torque of these must go somewhere, so we get the torque of both motors to the differential. If we run this one forwards and this one backwards, then the average of the speed of 1 and -1 is 0, so this differential has no speed on it, but the torque of both motors has to go somewhere. It's going here to wind up the pullback motor. Now, the average of the speeds I understood, but I hadn't thought about where the torque goes. So if you drive this motor, if on brand new gears, you drive this motor in reverse and leave this motor shut down, locked, then you'll get full speed here, 1 motor's worth of torque here, and it'll wind up the pullback. And when the pullback has as much energy stored as it can handle, the electric motor will stall and nothing further will happen. The electric motor stalls, the pullback motor is stopped, nothing happens here. But when you do run this one backwards and this one backwards as well, no, this one forwards as well, the speed is none, so the car doesn't move, but both motors' power goes through these teeth. That's when they will start clicking. And once they've started clicking, the teeth will be damaged, and then from then on, it will skip no matter what you do to try and load the pullback motor. I will demonstrate it now by turning on the battery. So we're going to run the pullback motor backwards on its own. And to do this, I'm going to lock the differential. We're going to run the pullback motor backwards by itself and see what happens. Doesn't skip. And if we run it forwards, you can hear it run faster for just a couple of seconds. But what happens if we hold the differential still again and run the main drive motor forwards and the pullback motor backwards? Skips. And that's because it's getting 2 motors worth of torque into those gears, which I hadn't tested when I said it was going to be fine. It's not fine. It doesn't work. The solution is simple. You need 2 of these, and you need to apply them already by step A16. In step A16, what you're going to do is remove this pinhole connector. Don't put a 3 long pin, put a 2 long pin, and change these 2 gears for the yellow knob gears I've just shown you. This may add a little bit of friction to the whole mechanism, and you may hear them, I don't know, because they can make a little noise when they move. But it's not going to skip. These gears do not skip. So it's an important fix. Good luck. Here we see the knob gears modification as discussed. I also added a half pin in to support the split frame there. Ideally, you'll do this during the build at the beginning. However, if you found your way to this video because you already have the model and because it's already clicking, you can still do it. So give this motor a good wiggle and these axles will just loosen up enough for you to pull them out. The motor will slide back 1 stud. There's just enough space. That'll let you take out this gear and this connector. Then this gear will come off as well. You may need to push that grey axle down, for which you may need something small and pointy. The 3 long pin here, however, either requires you to build back a very long way or to be very cruel to all of the pins along here if you want to try and just lever it open enough to get the pin out. So what did I do? I didn't exercise any cruelty to any plastic parts except one. I took a sharp knife, I cut along here. It's very easy to be accurate because you have a very small gap to cut along. And then I could push out the pin connector through there, and it took the small part of the pin with it, and that was the job done. Now let's give it a functions test. Does it now work better? So winding the motor up just from the auxiliary motor. The motor stalls as the pullback motor reaches its full potential. We'll wind it out,
Keep an ear out for the change in tone as the pullback motor reaches the end of its spring. There it is. Now we're going to do the same as we did before. We're going to lock the differential. We're going to run the main motor forwards and the auxiliary motor backwards. And I've got to be careful here to keep this piece locked in tight, or else that will click and give you a false sense. So bear with me. There we go. It's fully wound up with no clicking, which it did before. And now let's reverse and let them go. So that's how we fix that problem and everything. So now let's have a look at the mechanism for the doors. Sometimes when you close the doors, you may notice that it doesn't quite close all the way. I'll show you. And we can see that those two axles do not line up. They should line up. Now, the reason why is that the bolster of the seat gets in the way and takes a space that's required for the door. Okay, so why does it do that? We've tucked it out the way. That should be it. Job done. Let's operate the doors. Okay. But look, that gap's there again. It's not correct. It's the seatbelt doing it, the rubber band of the seatbelt. So maybe I didn't follow the instructions. Well, here are the instructions. We put it on the ball pin here. We stretch it around the fairing panel here, down to the ball pin. So, on the ball pin, around that fairing panel, and down to the ball pin at the bottom. You have to believe me, it's behind the door. So, in fact, if you take the seat belt and put it over this cross block right here, then you can fold the seat in, and when you operate the door, it's going to shut nice every single time. So, put the seat belts over this cross block, not underneath it. As you'll see, I have disassembled the car just enough to show you something I want to talk about regarding the front suspension. And it's a problem. So the problem is this. The suspension is extended right here, and it will go down, but not come most of the way back up. Now, you'll think, simple problem, the spring isn't strong enough. We've seen this before in other makes, other brands, Technic cars, but no, it's not the case. In fact, what's happening is that just here, there is no clearance, and this piece is rubbing against the spring. Okay, my fault. I thought must have made an error in the instructions. So here is step C88, where we add those 4 spaces to the car. That's these here that it's rubbing on. That's only this side that's rubbing. And then we have a wiring picture here, which shows that that cable should be between this piece and this piece, just like I have it. So, where's the mistake? Well, firstly, let's go on to the last step, which is E46, just as the front lid is put on. And we can see that those wires are now shown in this position, free behind those 1 length spaces. All right, okay, well, let's try that then, shall we? So, gonna take out the spring, put our little jack stand under the car so that it hangs freely. Remove those spaces. We're not going to worry about the other side for just right now. This is the side that's causing the problem for the suspension not returning. I'm going to put those back with the cable free behind those as it's shown right here on step E46. So now what does it do? Well, let's put the spring back in and let's find out. Okay. Now it returns like it ought to. But what's this? There is still very small clearance here, and I can tell you that if you're unlucky and the spring just sits off center, it can do exactly the same thing. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? Well, why don't we just remove those spaces? Okay, let's do it. Put our little jack stand back under the car. Take those spaces away and put in some plain 3 long pins. Okay, now what does it do? Take out the jack stand, see what it does. So, nothing is touching anymore. We have good space between here and on the back side. Nothing is touching, and it returns smoothly like it should. But what's going on there? That cable just gets tickled by the spring, and on this side the cable gets hit by the knob of the spring. Probably those cables are going to be just fine, but maybe not. Now, when we lift up the car, maybe you can just see, I don't know if the camera's going to get it, there's free play all through the system. You can see the 3x5 thin lift arms just moving on that spring without actually actuating the spring. What if we... Oh, well, that's no good. Let's get the jack stand again. And what can we do? We can use a piece just like this. It's a number 1 connector with a 2-stud axle. The number 1 connector is not in the box. The number 2 axle, you have plenty of spares from CADA. And we can see that it's just slightly longer here. Just slightly longer than the space, which is good because that will preload the spring and take out that slack. So let's get it together and see what it does. It pushes that cable pretty hard and it pushes it in the direction of the differential. Probably not a problem, but I don't want to take that chance. So put the jack stand in again, disconnect the spring. What happens if we put the cable instead just here and just here? So that is to say on the other side of those pins. Well, let's see. What does it do? We're going to reconnect that and take out the jack stand, and we're going to see. What does it do? Well, look at that. It returns to where it should, and it doesn't influence the cable. So, if you're building this car, that is what I recommend that you should do. And I actually like that the suspension settles just a little bit. It's normal for a real car to use around 1/3 of the suspension travel just for the weight of the car. But if you tell me, nah, you know what, it's a race car, I want firm, hard suspension, fine. We can use the shock absorber from CADA. It's from C61503, I believe, the military motorcycle with a sidecar. And we can fit it with its very hard spring into the car. And if we do that and take the jack stand out, we can see that it still settles just a little onto the spring, but it's now significantly firmer. you might say, like a race car should be. So if you want some fixes, there are some fixes, and if you want an upgrade, there's an upgrade. And let's look, what about at the back? Again, I've disassembled it just as much as I need to. If you're wondering about the panels just hanging there, that's so that the weight's correct. What we're doing here, the weight needs to be correct or else you don't get the correct bounce. So the rear settles and returns just fine. You can see it settles on the spring as you lift it, but there isn't that free play. The spring is already under tension. And one thing to mention is the shoe test. So the shoe test means what can you get between the wheel arch? Here, you can get a 1 stud lift arm in, and you can wobble it around a bit. And maybe you're going to say, hey, this is a race car. It shouldn't have space like that between the mudguards and between the tires. All right, well, let's see what we can do. Put the jack stand under, disconnect the shock absorber. We're going to remove this half stud bush, and we're going to put it back together. So, does that introduce free play? Nope. Does it allow us to pull it apart? Also no. That's good. So, still settles nicely, still returns well. Let's do the shoe test again, shall we? Take our 1 stud lift arm, and doesn't quite fit in there anymore. So maybe you're going to tell me, look, it's a race car. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to call this one a fix, but I'm going to call it an option that you might want to do, because you can't see how that's going to influence anything until the car is finished and until all the weight's on it. And again, you might tell me, look, it's a race car. I want it to have firm suspension. So jack stand goes in, shock absorber comes apart, we take it out, and we fit the hard one. Jack stand back out, and well, it works just as good. It's nice and firm, if that's your thing. And what about the shoe test? 1 arm, 1 stud lift arm, just nearly goes in. No wiggle room. So, there we have a couple of fixes, a couple of options, a couple of upgrades. Enjoy the model, enjoy building it, and build it how you want to build it. Bye for now. Okay, now we're going to have a little look at the new CADA panels. I really like them. I like how they are more rounded. I like how they flow into each other. I like how they just look more organic. It's just very suitable for the kind of models that we're really building with them. Now, there is just one little problem, and this is really nitpicking, and it's also very easily solved by CADA. CADA, if you're watching. So here, do we see this gap between the panels? It'll take an axle comfortably. In fact, possibly more. Maybe a whole lift arm would even fit in there. That gap has been made by the bar piece which holds the fairing base and the fairing panel together, pressing against the adjacent panel. It wouldn't be there with old-fashioned type panels, and it shouldn't be there now. So what we're going to do is take another piece and push that flush, or just below flush, fine. We're going to put that panel back in, and notice how that gap is, there is still a tiny gap there, but certainly you can't fit an axle in there anymore. It's much smaller, it's much tighter, and here especially, if we compare it on the other side, you can see all 3 holes there. Here you can, just barely see the top 2. And this is from the same angle, same piece, opposite side. In this case, as a make-do solution, I would suggest cut the bar shorter. But CADA, if you're listening, we need 2 stud long bars just for this purpose.
I'd like to thank you for your attention in watching this video about how to fix the various bugs and faults with the functions of the CADA Master Series Mercedes-AMG 1. I hope that that's helped you enjoy the model more, and I hope that that's helped you out with, at least with those clicking gears. If it has, give me a like, let me know in the comments. I'll be reading every single one and replying wherever I can. Thank you, and bye for now.